By empowering our students to lead and serve, Lead for Change is changing lives, transforming communities, and improving our world. Learn more, check out the research, and access free leadership curriculum now at leadforchange.org.
Good afternoon, everybody, or evening, depending on where you're joining us from. On behalf of the American Federation of Teachers, I'd like to welcome you to today's keynote. My name is Kelly Booz. I'm the director of our American Federation of Teachers Share My Lesson website. I'd like to say a special thank you to our virtual conference sponsor for today, Lead for Change. Help create the next generation of inspired leaders with the Lead for Change student leadership program. Lead for Change is a free leadership curriculum with a dynamic framework for successful community service, easily integrated into any class, club, or virtual setting. The Lead for Change Challenge is a chance to win up to $10,000 for your completed service project. You can learn more about Lead for Change by clicking on their logo at the top of your screen. We truly appreciate your support. All right, before I get this really underway, I'm going to show a quick housekeeping video so everybody knows how to engage. I know some of you are becoming experts with us, so this could also be a really quick fill up your water bottle break too.
Hello, my name is Kelly Booz, and I'm the director of the American Federation of Teachers Share My Lesson 1.8 million member community. Welcome to our 2021 Share My Lesson virtual conference, which is our 9th virtual conference. In other words, we've been doing virtual conferences in our pajamas and our yoga pants and our work mullets before it became the hip thing to do over the last year. We have a remarkable lineup of webinars with a focus on reopening schools, anti-bias education, civic engagement, mental health, and trauma-sensitive practices. But before we begin, let's go over a few housekeeping items. First of all, we want this to be an engaging webinar. We want you talking to each other, sharing your ideas with each other and with the presenters. So please open up that group chat widget if you haven't already, and tell us where you are joining us from and what you're looking forward to in this webinar. We will be facilitating a question and answer session at the end of this webinar, so be sure to submit your questions in that Q&A widget. We sometimes miss some of your great questions that happen in the chat box, so please be sure to submit your questions in that Q&A widget. This is also the best location to go in case you have any technical issues or need assistance. We will be monitoring the question and answer widget and responding to any issues that you may have. The most common issue is that your screen will freeze or you may have some audio issues. If that happens, please refresh your browser and try to use Chrome or Safari as your browsers of choice. We've added links to the PowerPoint where you can download the PowerPoint and any other related materials. We also have important links to continue on the discussion after this live webinar, or if you're joining us on demand, there is a discussion thread that you'll be able to continue even after this webinar concludes. We know a number of you will want to download a PDF certificate verifying your participation in this webinar. You will be able to do so after you've answered at least 2 poll questions and watched the webinar for a minimum of 35 minutes. If you are a teacher in New York, we are CTLE approved, and we've provided information in the confirmation emails on how to access that CTLE credit. Finally, from all of us at the American Federation of Teachers and Share My Lesson, thank you. Whether you're a teacher, support staff, administrator, specialized instructional support personnel, parent, education leader, or you fit into multiple categories, you are heroes and you have endured. We've still got this.
Okay, so just so everybody knows how to use those poll questions, since they are tied to your ability to download that PDF certificate of participation, I've put up kind of a fun question to kick us off as we think ahead to the summer. What do you feel about warm weather? Now that poll question should be showing up right where the PowerPoint slides were showing. So your answer choices are the beach is calling my name, or no thanks, take me to the mountains. I feel, frankly, I'm sort of torn because we didn't get a chance to go out skiing this year for, obvious reasons, for limitation on travel and stuff. So I do miss the mountains, but I also am very excited to get to the beach, and I'm excited not to do any more virtual schooling with my children and take a break from all of that. And I'm sure a lot of you educators who are either doing virtual teaching or concurrent teaching or hybrid teaching and stuff probably need a break from that computer too. All right, so let's get ahead and submit that poll question, and then we'll go ahead and share. And you can, while you're at it, let us know in the chat box what are you looking forward to for this summer. And thank you. All right, a lot of beachgoers that are here. Well, I want to turn this over and get our VIP here. I'm so thrilled that we can be joined by iCivics and Dr. Daniel Allen with Harvard's Edmund J. Safra Center for Ethics to discuss such an important conversation about prioritizing history and civics. Dr. Allen, we are so thrilled to have you as a civic educator, having worked actually with iCivics and a number of these civic organizations and individuals who've worked on the Educating for American Democracy roadmap. I'm thrilled that you can be here and that you're doing all this work and leading the charge here. So thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. It is great to be here. Welcome, everybody. I'm so glad you've chosen to join us this afternoon to talk about the future of civic education. It is a real honor to be able to share with you today work that a big network of people has done over the last 2 years to create a roadmap for excellence in history and civics for all learners K through 12. I'm going to introduce you to this roadmap today. We hope it'll be a tool that can inspire you, a tool that you can make use of immediately. You'll also hear about some resources that are available to you. So my hope is that we're going to get to a place where you're going to feel ready to dive in and start figuring out how to make use of this roadmap, for your own instructional work. So it's an honor to be here with all of you. As Kelly said, I know educators have worked so hard this year. It has been extraordinary to see the imagination and creativity you've all brought to the work our students and learners are doing. But let's dive in. I'll tell you what this roadmap is, how it came to be. Let's see. So starting in the summer of 2019, a network of about 300 scholars, educators, students, and practitioners answered a call put out by the National Endowment of the Humanities in the first instance, and then also the Department of Education. The call was to create a roadmap for excellence in history and civic learning. There is a recognition that we haven't clarified in this country for ourselves for a long time exactly what we're trying to pursue in history and civic education. So a handful of us to start, the organizations at the bottom of the slide, linked arms and decided to try to answer this call together. Circle at Tufts, which does research on student civic learning and engagement. iCivics, you'll know there are civics materials broadly distributed around the country. The Edmund J. Safra Center for Ethics at Harvard, which I have the pleasure of having headed for the last few years. The School of Civic and Economic Thought and Leadership at Arizona State University, and then the Jonathan Tisch College of Civic Life, again at Tufts. We linked arms and spanned geographies, spanned demographies, spanned disciplinary expertise, spanned viewpoint and ideologies, and then we started building in, bringing others in. So we were ultimately a group of 300 people. Here are the pictures of the steering committee members, the executive committee that guided the work. Louise Dubé from iCivics, there above me, Paul Cariz on the left from Arizona State, Jane Kamensky from Harvard, who's a historian of the American Revolution, Kai Kawashima Ginsburg at Tufts, Peter Levine at Tufts, and Tammy Waller from the Department of Education in Arizona. So we really ran the gamut, and our job was to develop guidance, as I said, for civic and history educational excellence. Our goal was to answer the question, and a question we have avoided for a long time in this country, of what and how to teach our students to build knowledge and capacities to sustain our constitutional democracy, America's constitutional democracy. Now, what's in this roadmap exactly? As many of you know, the challenge of answering the question of what and how to teach for history and civics learning has been fraught for decades. And one of the things that we did to fundamentally change the conversation was to shift from trying to deliver lists of names and dates of things people might know to focusing instead on the questions that every learner should have the chance to encounter over the course of their K through 12 learning experience. In addition, therefore, to building out an inquiry framework, the other thing that we wanted to do was really focus on a set of design principles. We wanted to empower educators all around the country to be a part of the same conversation, saying, okay, here are the questions students should consider, and here are some design principles that you could bring to bear in thinking about how to design curricula and instructional strategies to help students engage with those questions. I'll come back to those design challenges and say more about them to give you a concrete sense of what they are about. But I wanted just to sort of start with that the focus here is on an inquiry framework. So the goal, you can probably tell from that focus, is to promote depth over breadth. And importantly, this is not a national curriculum nor a mandate. It's instead, again, a roadmap, a way for us all to start driving in a similar direction, even as we work in our own contexts to experiment and innovate and build up resources and capacity for excellence in history and civic learning. So let's start with a poll question. In most states, what do you think? Are students adequately prepared for their roles as citizens in a constitutional democracy? Do you agree, strongly agree, neither agree nor disagree, or disagree with this statement? And after you start sharing your answers to this poll question, it would be great if you could also use the group chat and share a few words about where you're from and why you gave the answer that you gave. We can go ahead and, okay, so we've got some strong disagreement for starters for this question.
And just as a reminder, that poll question is showing up right exactly where the slides have been showing, the presenter PowerPoint slides. So it should be right in that exact same box.
So we have a lot of disagreement flowing through the chat for sure already. And we have people from everywhere, from Southern California. We have people from Mexico City. Yes, there's a problem of not enough time in the curriculum for students to have that preparation. We have somebody here from Vermont, from Brooklyn, Cincinnati, Ohio is in the house. And look at that. Again, I think I'm seeing a lot of folks who do not agree with the idea that students are adequately prepared. All right, so here are our poll results. In fact, 51% of you disagree and 25% of you strongly disagree with the idea that students are adequately prepared for their roles as citizens in a constitutional democracy. Well, our team is in agreement with you there and thinking that we haven't done enough to support our students' preparation in recent years. And that is really the work that we have undertaken. Why now? I mentioned that the work that we've been doing has been underway for several years. So we started before the January 6th moment. And those of us who engaged in the work have all been working on civic education for a long time. So we've all had a sense that we are not giving our young people what they need in the area of history and civic learning. The point was really brought home, I think, for the nation as a whole on January 6th, where we understood our constitutional democracy to be fundamentally precarious. Many things go into restoring the health of a constitutional democracy, but surely one of them is an education that prepares young people for effective citizenship. This is a matter of civic knowledge, it's a matter of dispositions, it's a matter of the skills of collaboration and bridge building, being able to cross lines of difference and engage with one another productively, even across lines of disagreement. So in addition to the recent events, we also have other indicators of the way in which we have not really given our students the foundation they need for effective and rewarding lives of civic participants. NAEP scores show us with only 24% of students reaching proficiency in civics scores over an extended period of time. And then there's the data point that to me is the most painful one and the most important one, that for the generation of Americans born before World War II, 72% of that age cohort considers it essential to live in a democracy. For millennials, so people under 40, only 30% consider it essential to live in a democracy. So we face a moment in our history where we have to honestly acknowledge that we are not succeeding at passing on from one generation to the next an understanding of, commitment to, and appreciation for the value of constitutional democracy. Again, there are many reasons for that, many reasons to be frustrated with our constitutional democracy. But education in history and civics is an important foundation for any young person's development of a sense of a place within our constitutional democracy, a way to take ownership of our constitutional democracy to become an effective civic participant. It's not an accident that we've gotten to the place that we have with regard to declines of time in the classroom on civic learning, decline of youth engagement with civic learning. It's a direct reflection of where our national priorities have been. So we currently spend $50 per student per year of federal monies on STEM education and only 5 cents per student per year on civic education. The reason for this is that for many decades, we have believed in this country, and rightly so, that in order to secure our competitiveness in economic terms and in national security terms, we needed to invest in STEM education. And that investment shows, and it shows up in the dollars allocated here. But the truth is, if we want to compete on the world stage, surely we want to compete as a healthy constitutional democracy. We want to do well as the kind of society that we are. Maintaining civic strength as a constitutional democracy requires that we invest in civics learning as well. So the roadmap, in a way, gives us a direction to go for a renewed investment in civic education. And that's an investment of will and purpose and energy of all the community of educators contributing to thinking about how to bring civic education, history and civics learning back into the classroom. The roadmap can be used by teachers directly to design instructional materials. It can be used by schools, districts, or states to design instructional standards. The roadmap, with the way we structure the questions, encourages a telling of America's plural yet shared story and a more complete and honest accounting of the past, both the good and the bad. The questions really work hard to excavate the perspectives on a variety of different kinds of people who have lived in this country, situated differently over the course of time. The roadmap also seeks to cultivate not only knowledge, but skills, dispositions, civic virtues, including reflective patriotism, the ability to develop an appreciation for this community and country we live in, and also to be able to criticize it where it needs criticism. So to be able to combine love of country with the capacity for careful reflection and thoughtfulness about, again, the good and the bad. Both stories have to be told. Both stories need to be reckoned with. The roadmap is organized in 7 themes. I'll review them in a minute. And it crosses over 4 grade bands to make it manageable. You sort of focus on the grade band that's pertinent to your own area of work. And importantly, in these themes and in the questions that we've used to give them structure, we've integrated history and civics questions. So history questions are the story of how have we become the country that we are, all of the unfolding of events. And civics questions are really the questions about how democracy works. What are these institutions? Why are they designed this way? What's the role of a citizen or a civic participant? How does that change over time? So history and civics then come together. And then the roadmap also includes pedagogic strategies for excellence in teaching. So not only the what to teach, but also the how. So here are the 7 themes. We start with civic participation up there at 1 o'clock, because at the end of the day, the reason we want to invest in excellence in history and civic learning is to ensure that we have a national body of healthy citizens ready to participate effectively, understanding our government, bringing the knowledge, skills, and dispositions to the table needed for a healthy democracy. That is the purpose of this work. Now, to achieve that high quality civic engagement, civic participation, of course, we do need knowledge about how this country has changed over time. Our changing landscape takes us through with questions through the story of our changing demography, our changing borders, geographies, climate questions. We, the people, takes us to the question of how we became a political society. How is it that we call ourselves one people, part of a shared set of political institutions? The theme, a new government and constitution, really dives into the content of our political institutions and their growth and change over time. Institutional and social transformation focuses on all the important transformations as we've transitioned from being a society that had enslavement at its roots to getting rid of enslavement, the challenges of the civil rights era, and into the present. The issue of social movements, the question of how power operates in a democracy and how change comes in democracy. The 6th theme brings us to a people in the world. We are not here by ourselves on this planet. It's a big planet. So the question of what is our civic life together throughout the globe as a whole And then we conclude with contemporary debates and possibilities. Again, coming back to that question of what is before us as a people, how do we come to work together, what do we need to debate, why do we debate the things that we do, and how can we have those debates be productive? How can we learn the skills of civic and civil disagreement? So here's an example of a theme. The theme, We the People, explores the idea of the people as a political concept, not just a group of people who share a physical landscape, previous theme, but also a group of people who share political ideals and institutions. And then within that theme, by grade band, you'll find history questions and civics questions. So here are some examples from one of the older grade bands. Who are we, the people of the United States? And how has the nation's population changed over time? What does our history reveal about the aspirations and tensions captured by the motto, E pluribus unum? Why does constitutional democracy depend on the idea of the people? What values, virtues, and principles can knit together we, the people of the United States of America? These are hard questions. We want to acknowledge that. But we believe every learner can indeed engage in these questions. And the process of engaging in questions of this kind will provide numerous opportunities for building knowledge, building the foundation that students need to succeed in developing answers to the questions in this inquiry context. So to give you an example, therefore, of the comparison, current state standards often will list historical events such as the French and Indian War, the Stamp Act, the Boston Tea Party, or Shays' Rebellion. Whereas in the roadmap, the theme 4, New Government and Constitution, asks questions like this. What were the experiences with the British government of British colonists, Indigenous Americans, enslaved Americans, and indentured Americans? There's that work of telling that plural but shared story. And then that's a history question. Here's a civics question. How do we decide what is fair when we're part of a group, right? So the questions are, again, integrating history, historical learning, and civics learning. They're helping us tell a plural but shared story. Now, let's come back to those design challenges. I mentioned those design challenges. And everybody who has done work in history and civics learning knows the things that we tend to get stuck on. When we engage young people in the development of the capacity for civic agency, it can often be the case that as they learn about our political institutions in this massive democracy, they can feel very, very small. They can become paralyzed by the size of our problems. So as we work to teach them, to bring them into their life as civic participants, it's really important to be able both to motivate agency, build knowledge, but in ways that don't lead to any sort of sense of paralysis. So the first design challenge is how to combine the building out of knowledge about this sort of big country that we're part of, while also motivating the kind of agency that can sustain the country. Second design challenge is one I've already alluded to. We have to be able to tell a plural yet shared story, one where we can be honest about the bad in our past, about crimes, whether of omission or commission, but without tipping into cynicism, and where we can also be honest and appreciative of the good in our past, but without sort of lifting off into adulation. Those are the sort of guardrails that we need to tell stories that give us a chance of telling shared stories, again, overlapping stories. We have to be able to celebrate and critique compromise. Compromise is critical to democracy, but there are also bad compromises. How can you bring both of those things into view when you're teaching? So here are some more specific examples around that first design challenge. So there are then very sort of specific design principles to focus on as you're thinking about crafting a lesson or crafting a curriculum. How can we help students understand the full context of their roles as civic participants without creating paralysis or a sense of the insignificance of their own agency in relationship to the magnitude of our society, the globe, and shared challenges? Educators all over the country are already successfully delivering instruction that does this, that meets this need to both empower with knowledge about something that's quite big and also to elevate and develop agency in young people. And so that's our goal in the design challenges, is to sort of take some of the hardest parts of developing productive and supportive civic and history learning and invite a community of educators into a community of practice to experiment their way to solutions. So here's another one. How can we help students become engaged citizens who also sustain civil disagreement and civic friendship, and thus American constitutional democracy? And then lastly, how can we help students pursue civic action that is authentic, responsible, and informed? Okay, so key design challenges. All right, I said it's not just about what to teach, it's also about how to teach. So the roadmap includes a focus on 6 core pedagogical principles. Excellence for all. This country needs every single one of our learners to have the opportunity for developing excellence in history and civics learning. Our political processes are open to all of us. We all have the right and chance to participate. And so the education should be available to all with an expectation that we can deliver excellence for all. The focus is on a growth mindset and capacity building, with various forms of continuous learning and continuous formative assessment being key. The goal should be to build an EAD-ready classroom and school where there's space for inquiry, where there's space to bring history and civics together, where there's space to bring knowledge and agency together. Again, I'm emphasizing here that inquiry is the primary mode of learning emphasized in this roadmap. There is also an important element of encouraging the practice of constitutional democracy and student agency. So what are the real authentic opportunities students have to try out what they're learning in real contexts? And then there's the critical strategy of assessing, reflecting, and improving. For educators themselves, continuous self-assessment and improvement, continuous learning, and also for students, real emphasis on feedback. Now, we have incredibly ambitious goals. Now you understand what's in the roadmap, an inquiry framework with 7 themes and some design principles so that we can build a community of practice and experimentation around the creation of lessons, the creation of curricula. We have exemplified some of these already with a website where we're curating resources, examples of lessons and curricular modules that align with the roadmap. And from that website, we hope a community of practice will build out, adding to a world of experimentation. There will be quite a great deal of variation across the country in the ways in which people meet the design challenges or make use of the roadmap. And we welcome that diversity of a big community of experimenters. And in our ambitious goals for implementation, we really want to see this move out across the nation as a whole. We set no small goals here. Our goal is that 60 million students, which basically means all students, excellence for all, will have access to high quality civic learning opportunities, where high quality is defined as excellence in teaching of civic knowledge, civic skills, and civic dispositions, and where there will be a diverse supermajority actively engaged in earning civic learning credentials. So that's a reference to an alternative approach to thinking about assessment, that students might, for example, earn badges for the work that they're doing in civic learning. Or schools, to come to the middle ambition there, might earn seals to say that they're civic ready. So our second ambition is that we cultivate and develop 100,000 schools to be civic ready. Each school would have a civic learning plan and resources to support it. And that civic learning plan would prioritize excellence in teaching of the knowledge, the skills, and dispositions that we've been talking about. And then alongside that, our goal, and this is over 10 years, this is a decade-long goal, is that we achieve 1 million teachers who are EAD ready. They've received excellent pre- and in-service professional development that aligns with the roadmap. Okay, so are you ready to dive into the EAD roadmap? Would you let us know, give us a sense, and use the chat, please, to tell us what excites you most about this new approach. Great, good to see some yeses coming up in the chat, and keep also putting your answers in the poll question, especially for those of you who are getting a certificate. We want to make sure you get your second poll in so that you can receive your certificate. But also, oh, great, so the inquiry framework, fantastic. Happy to see the focus on civic discourse, good to hear. And it's useful for leveraging your school, fantastic, that's excellent. We are hoping that would be the case. Yes, it's good that there's civic learning in the younger grades. We can do civic learning in K through 3. We don't have to wait until high school. The emphasis on critical thinking, on civil discourse are both positives. That's excellent. Glad to see the appreciation for the civics thematic questions. And glad that there is a focus on multiple perspectives. Great, glad that that is exciting to you. Really happy to hear that. Wanting to learn best practices to help students think critically. We are working on that, and we are really calling on this whole community of educators to help us identify those best practices, be able to provide examples. Fantastic. I am so happy to hear that. That is really wonderful. Thank you so much. 51% of you are absolutely ready to dive into the EAD roadmap. Another 37% you think you're ready. That's fantastic. And there are also some of you who are not sure yet. You don't know, or it looks like it might be hard. We would welcome your thoughts about the challenges and difficulty in the chat too. I have a colleague who's keeping track of the chat. We'd love to get feedback on what the obstacles or barriers look like. That will help us as we try to take this implementation work forward. All right, I just have a little bit more to share with you, and then we can transition over to Q&A. So here are some actionable steps you can take. You can invite others to the table. Share the roadmap with your network, your colleagues, your school, your community leaders. Ask them to go ahead and read it. The roadmap has a report at the front which makes the case for why we need to reinvest in civic education now, history and civic learning. And then, of course, the roadmap has all those questions. And it's fun to sit down and actually review the questions and think about, wow, yes, there is a lot to learn to understand this country. There is a lot to learn to become ready to be an effective and engaged, authentic civic participant. But the truth of the matter is, this is really work we need to do. And we can do it if we form a big, vibrant community of practice. Please explore the resources. Visit our website. I'll show it to you in just a second. And there you can find lesson plans and curricular materials, as I mentioned. You can download and read the Pedagogy Companion. Join the movement. Visit our Take Action page, and you can learn more about individuals and how different people are already using their voices or can use their voices to make this roadmap a reality. And continue the dialogue. We are going to be hosting partner-led webinars, running office hours, and you can visit our events page to sign up and learn more and get the chance to deepen your understanding of the roadmap and to think about how you might make use of it. So here's the roadmap. You can find us, Educating for American Democracy. There on the right, you'll see the button where you can download the report and the roadmap. There you go. And in addition to resources there for you, resources to share with your colleagues, I want you to know that we're currently running a design challenge contest. We are asking K-12 students to illustrate the design challenges themselves. And we will use their creations to help produce visualizations for those design challenges. So please spread the word and make sure your students have the chance. There are prizes. I don't remember what the prizes are right this moment, but there are indeed prizes for this contest. And we can ask you also to join the network. You can follow us at EAD Roadmap. You can tweet with the hashtag EAD Roadmap. And that will put you into this community of practice that we're talking about. It'll help you join the conversation and become one of the experimenters taking this work forward. Thank you. I'm really glad to have had the chance to talk with you this afternoon, and I'm very eager to hear your questions. I look forward to that. My colleague Emma is going to join me, and we will have a conversation.
And questions, we have so many wonderful questions. We're not going to get to them all, but we have folks in the chat from our team who are answering some of those there, but we'll see what we can get to right now. Dr. Allen, there has been a limited but energetic discussion around the term constitutional democracy, folks sort of questioning the decision to go with that term versus republic. I'm hoping you could speak to that.
Sure, I'm happy to. I mentioned at the start that one of the things we worked very hard to do from the beginning was to build a group of people, extending it always outward, that brought ideological diversity, viewpoint diversity into our group. So really reaching across the full spectrum. And as we did that, we knew we would have to do important work to compromise as we move forward together. We realized we were trying to do something that lots of people say can't be done. We all say we can't come to agreement these days. And so as we went, we had to work through hard questions and achieve compromises. And the phrase constitutional democracy is one of those compromises. One of the literally very first things we did in this work was spend several weeks debating whether or not we should refer to this country as a democracy or a republic. Both words were used at the American founding. Okay, there's a bit of a red herring out there that suggests only one word was used. That's not the case. Madison advocated for the term republic. Hamilton in the New York ratifying debates described the Constitution as a representative democracy. So both words were very much in use at the founding. And as we had this debate, it became clear that for people who hold up the word democracy, the focus is really on the role of the people, popular sovereignty of ordinary people. For people who hold up the word republic, the focus is really on order and structure and concepts like rule of law. So our compromise was to recognize that the phrase constitutional democracy captures both of those ideas. The democracy term brings in that focus on the idea that it's for the people, by the people, of the people, and the Constitution word brings in the focus on order and structure and rule of law. So constitutional democracy is the compromise that we came to as a way of moving our work forward together, despite coming from different places across the ideological spectrum.
Thank you so much for that. Stefan asks, how might we approach students who are jaded, feeling disillusioned about the possibility of a knit together population with a shared vision of American values? Many are skeptical that we can bridge the chasms that divide us.
There is so much skepticism right now, so much doubt about whether we can do this. And that's another thing, honestly, we're really proud about in this work. I keep saying it over and over again. We were a network of 300 people with incredible diversity, demographic diversity, geographic diversity, viewpoint diversity. And the way we did that was really just by building relationships with a focus on a problem to solve together. And we picked our problem, we built our group, we did some work, we compromised, we built our group out, and we kept building our group out. We literally did relational work to move this work forward. And in that regard, we believe that the actual process we used to develop this roadmap is itself an example of what we're trying to teach and cultivate. So it can help a lot to engage learners around solving a problem of some kind in their community, in the school community or more broadly, and helping them to figure out how to then build the relationships together to do that work. So yes, it's very hard, without any question, to cross the chasm that we currently experience. But the way to do that really is, not to think there's a magic wand or silver bullet, but to go ahead and actually form a relationship. Try to form a relationship around something that's less challenging, less difficult, so that then when you get to the harder question, you have resources of trust to fall back on. I think the question also included a broader question about engagement. And my experience, I'm lucky to be able to do a lot of work here in Massachusetts in civic education. We're working with 14 districts with curriculum that we've developed. And it's just such a wonderful and rewarding experience to see incredible engagement from young people, actually. And it really is, they're having the chance to sink their teeth into things they're seeing on the news, to current events, matters a lot. I think they have a lot of motivation to engage authentically. And so then I think the real trick is how to move from that to deepen their historical understanding, to deepen their understanding of the structure of political institutions and the like. But so that authenticity, that connection to a young person's own lived experience is a really important part of engagement.
Throughout the chat, there were a couple mentions of misinformation and media literacy education, and then someone just flat out asked the question, how does the roadmap or EAD handle media literacy education?
So there are some questions in the roadmap that focus on media literacy specifically. There are questions about things like, how do you tell what the source is that you're getting information from? How do you judge the quality of sources? Also questions about how we take responsibility for our own contributions to language and communication in a media context. So it's partly about how we consume media, but also how we create and interact with others in digital environments. I think it's really important that we all recognize librarians as our allies in addressing issues of misinformation and disinformation. Librarians are information professionals. This is fundamentally their job, their business, their expertise. And I think if schools, if educators can really work to engage librarians, whether that's a school librarian or a local public librarian, I think there are a lot of opportunities to build resources and programs to really support the development of media literacy for kids. So when we think about who this big community of practice is, it includes librarians. That's just a really important point when we are trying to do work on media literacy.
So that's a really great segue into a question that comes from Don. He says K12 teachers are already challenged time and resources, existing curriculum, content demands. Is the use of experienced resources other than existing public educators being considered, i.e. retired professionals, public service teaching background?
So that's a super interesting question. And in the roadmap work we've done, we have really focused on the K-12 context, the formal context of schools, but there are a lot of people experimenting right now with additional sort of wraparound approaches to civic learning, whether that's in an after-school context or in partnerships with nonprofits in the community. And many of those experiments do tap into to other communities other than educators to support civic learning. So in some communities, lawyers will gather together and support civic education in classrooms. I think you're right that communities of retirees can be very valuable in making contributions in this way. I think there's a lot of room for imagination and creativity in how we bring a sort of civic spirit to reinforcing educators in this work.
Early in your presentation, you talked about the declining trust in democracy, the NAEP scores, and what happened on January 6th. Can you connect those dots? Can you help us understand why these things are connected and bring us to this sort of why now moment?
Sure. I mean, this is a very hard question. And I mean, there are many things that are interconnecting here. So maybe let me just first tell the story a little bit more about civic education and then say some things about our other challenges. So with regard to civic education, the growth of investment in STEM education really goes back to World War II. So in World War II, the country needed to beat the Germans to the creation of an atom bomb. And so the Manhattan Project was set up. The president of Harvard, James Bryant Conant, was a leader of that. And the process of he sort of built a network among several universities with federal funding to drive this work forward. And that was a really important transitional moment in American education because it was the point at which the federal government began to invest very seriously in science and in higher ed in the first instance, but then that started to flow down into K-12. And then the Sputnik moment followed, where the Soviet Union launched a satellite. We had a feeling we were falling behind in the space race, and that led to another redoubling of effort with regard to STEM education. And then again, in the 1980s, out of worries with economic competitiveness, we did the same thing. So over that period of time, as we invested in STEM education, we also reduced our investments in civic education. So it's just simply the case that we haven't given young people the same access to knowledge and understanding of how a constitutional democracy operates. Now, I don't want to say that everything that we're currently experiencing falls on the shoulders of our young people or because they sort of don't know enough or something like that. I mean, that would be deeply unfair and far from true. We also see many ways in which young people are engaged in trying to bring change in our world, have a positive vision for how it can be better as a society, and are trying to bring that about. So, I mean, in terms of understanding January 6th, there's another part of our story that we have to tell, which is about the way in which over several decades, our political institutions have left a lot of Americans on both sides of the political spectrum feeling very disconnected, very alienated, very disempowered. So when people don't believe their democracy is working for them, then they don't believe it's worth having a democracy. So that's another part of the story. And ultimately, we do need to invest in civic education for young people as a part of restoring our internal capacity to make democracy work for us. But these things go together. So it's not all on the kids. I don't want to suggest that. I mean, we grown-ups too have to do a lot of work to restore health to how our political institutions function. And again, that sense of disaffection and disempowerment really spans the gamut. It affects people on both sides of the political spectrum. And that's something we also need to face honestly.
Thank you. Someone asked if you could talk about the connection between EAD and state standards and how they might work together.
So in short, our hope is that state standard setters can take EAD and take a look at their standards and really consider whether the time has come for some evolution. And there are really two kinds of evolution, I think, that the roadmap makes possible. One would be a very profound evolution, whereby state standard setters would be able to transition standards themselves to an inquiry framework. We'd be able to think about how to organize education around whether or not sets of questions are being engaged and addressed, and to also shift accountability. You might end up seeing accountability, if folks went in that really profound direction, you might see accountability also shifting in the direction of performance tasks or civic learning badges and the like. That's one possibility. Another way that the roadmap could interact with standards is in those cases where standards writers intend to maintain the structure of focusing on the specific content objectives that you want to see emerging from the inquiry pursuit. Then the goal would be to sort of take the existing state standards and sort of map them onto the roadmap to identify which questions in the roadmap are supported by the standards and which questions in the roadmap are currently going unaddressed. Because then that's a place maybe where the state might want to think about removing some of the standards that seem less necessary. There's nothing in the roadmap they align with, and perhaps adding some standards to align with those parts of the roadmap that are not currently supported by the state standards.
Thank you. So what I love about the Share My Lesson conference is that we're talking to so many different types of educators. We have English teachers, social studies, math, we have librarians, art teachers. And there's been a couple of questions about the way in which EAD can support an interdisciplinary approach to teaching. And I was hoping you could speak to that, Dr. Allen.
That's a beautiful question, and it's so important. And I think it goes to the heart of what was a bit implicit in some of the other questions too, which is with all of the burdens on our schools, all of the burdens on our educators, how are we going to find the time, the resources to support this reinvestment in history and civics learning? I think the answer has to be partnership. So this is about social studies courses, yes, but I think this is also an opportunity for our arts teachers, for our ELA teachers, for our science educators to join in a project of doing work on civics learning. So there's no reason that all these other disciplines can't also make use of the roadmap. And the more we can internalize the questions from the roadmap into our teaching across disciplines, the richer the civic learning for our young people will be. And I think a related point is that it's often thought that our youngest learners aren't ready yet for civic learning. But they are, and the same thing. I mean, so for our young learners, we don't separate necessarily between all the different disciplines as sort of starkly as we do for the later grade bands. And so that's another good example of where we really can use the questions from the roadmap sort of across the full range of kinds of instruction that we develop for our learners.
Thank you. Something I like to say is that every teacher is a civics teacher, and I think that is especially true and important for elementary level teachers. Yes. Have you heard of any pushback to this inclusive approach to our history, or to the idea, for example, that compromise is a necessary part of a functioning democracy?
We've worked really hard to build a big coalition, and I talked about the 300 people who worked on this, but we also have an incredible coalition of organizations that have endorsed the roadmap, and they also span the gamut. So the AFT has endorsed the roadmap. We're super proud of that. The Bill of Rights Foundation has endorsed the roadmap. Hillsdale is contributing resources to the roadmap, and they anchor an important charter school network. So we have a real array of kinds of organizations behind us. And again, it spreads geographically around the country, spreads demographically, also spreads with viewpoint diversity. So that's our approach, is to keep building a coalition. And yes, yes, we have heard some worries about whether the roadmap is, I think the only pushback I have heard, I will say, is a question about diversity. The roadmap embraces the plurality of American experience, the full range of stories being pertinent. The roadmap also really invites students to engage in thinking about how, out of many, a pluribus, we do shape ourselves into a whole society and into one, and says unum, of a kind. So we can be very, very diverse and heterogeneous at the same time that we actually also have the capacity to develop common purpose. Those are core commitments of the roadmap, that combination of recognizing the value of diversity and centrality to the American story, and also seeing that there's a critical story about how we come together and pull together.
Thank you. Someone has asked if you could explain how educating for American democracy will help build or cultivate civic dispositions.
Sure. So again, so what's really important here is that what this roadmap does is empower educators. When you go through the questions, I gave you some examples of how there are history questions and civics questions. There are also questions that are about the civic dispositions that really give learners the opportunity to engage in sort of metacognitive reflection about the skills they're developing, about the kinds of dispositions they bring to their interactions with others. The history questions also seek to bring out stories of the ways in which people, for example, have formed political friendships across lines of difference and the like. So there are sort of parts of the history questions that work to help students understand critical civic dispositions by virtue of learning about the stories of people who've exhibited them, stories of courage from change makers, as well as stories of political friendship. And then there are the civics questions, which really support opportunities for metacognitive reflection. And then I think the other important thing to say is, if you look at the pedagogic strategies, there really is a kind of effort to support both engagement in building of knowledge, in some sense, in a more traditional way. We sort of think about learning, but also to support the development of student agency. So an encouragement of things like project-based learning, student projects, and the like. So I think when you put those things together, you get a very powerful model to support the development of dispositions that are about collaboration, about planning, about coordinating with others, about being able to deal with disagreement in the context of group projects. And then, as I said, that opportunity for metacognitive reflection about why those things are valuable.
I think we have time for one more question. And here it is. Children need to see their parents and grandparents respecting each other and participating in our democracy and in their communities. How do we educate the older generations too?
No, I think that's really an important question. And as I said, I think that one of the wonderful things that's happening right now in the civic learning space is that there are a lot of people who are digging into questions of adult education and really trying to start building out adult education, civic ed programs. And you're right. I mean, it's sort of the data is that on things like misinformation and disinformation, it's actually older people who are much more likely to circulate misinformation and disinformation rather than younger people. So we definitely have work to do across generations. I think another important thing about civic learning is it's really important that educators connect to families and communities. And so, just speaking for myself personally, I really encourage educators as they're starting to build out work in history and civics learning to really make sure you're reaching out to families and building those relationships. And that's one of the ways we get started on rebuilding, knitting ourselves back together again, to develop the capacity for collaboration where adults are learning together at the same time that young people are learning together.
Thank you so much. Folks, thank you so much for joining us today. If you haven't already, please go to www.educatingforamericandemocracy.org, download the report and the roadmap, explore the interactive roadmap on the site itself, and click on that Take Action page to find stakeholder briefs for you and for some of your colleagues. And I think we say thank you to you, Dr. Allen, and we turn it over to our friends at Share My Lesson to close us out.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, everybody. Thanks for being here.